Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to the Scrutiny Committee of Norwich City Council on the 10th of June 2020. I have a short statement I need to read out before the meeting begins. This meeting is being held under the local authorities and police and crime panels, brackets coronavirus, brackets flexibility of local authorities and police and crime meetings, brackets England and Wales, brackets regulations 2020, meaning that decisions made will have the same validity as those made at a meeting held at City Hall. A recording of this meeting will appear on the Council's YouTube channel. Can I ask participants to ensure that they are muted when not speaking, or you may be muted by an officer to maintain audio quality. The chat function is enabled for members to report technical difficulties and to indicate that you wish to speak, but you will only be able to message the Chair, Vice Chair and Democratic Services. So with that out of the way, let's move on to the agenda. Item 1 is apologies. I've had apologies from Councillor Manning, who's has Councillor Driver as a substitute, and Councillor Viv Thomas, who has broadband issues. We've had a last-minute computer difficulty for Councillor Carlo, but she's been able to join us by telephone. We've had no public questions or petitions. Do any members have any declarations of interest? If you do, unmute and let me know. No? Okay, thank you. Item 4, in the minutes of our meeting from the 11th of February, are people happy that they are an accurate record of the meeting and I can sign them off at such time as I can get into City Hall to find the hard copy? Can you nod, given that you're muted? Thumbs up from Councillor Ryan, thank you. Good, so those minutes are approved. So that takes us on to item 5, which is the COVID-19 recovery report. From a practical point of view, in terms of the way that this report will be undertaken, we'll have Councillor Waters, as leader of the council, will give a brief introduction. Stephen Evans, the Chief Executive, will give an executive summary, and you'll note from the report that there are sections 1 through to 9. What I propose is that we look at sections 4 to 9 in turn, with members asking questions, and then we'll have a discussion on each of those sections before moving on to the next. And to help with different versions of the document, if we can use paragraph numbers as well. Councillor Ryan, you have your hand up at the moment. You're currently muted, Councillor Ryan. Councillor Ryan, we've got you muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you can. Yep.
It's a message re Councillor Giles. He's got IT problems at the moment, but is trying to join us as soon as he can.
Okay, thank you. I think he's just making his way in at the moment, so thank you very much for that. So, as Councillor Giles is now making his way in, Councillor Waters, if we can unmute you, and if you can make your introductions, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair, and very pleased to be at Scrutiny Committee this morning. Thank you for organising the meeting so that you can send your thoughts and recommendations up to Cabinet, which I'll be chairing this afternoon, and I know you will be at that meeting, James, to present those views. So a brief introduction from me. I wrote the political introduction to this report. It is just a reminder to all of us that we've all experienced the impact of the coronavirus. It's something that's been shared right across the city. The council has had to reshape the way it responds to this once-in-a-century pandemic. And had to redesign its frontline services to meet the city in quarantine, and with a particular focus, of course, on vulnerable residents. But the reality is that this is not just about us. It's about the wide network of partnerships, and we are well served by strong relationships across the city. that have worked together to limit the impact of the virus. And my thanks to many of the hundreds of volunteers that have given time freely to support fellow citizens in every community. There's a lot of work going on with the other Norfolk local authorities, regular meetings to coordinate action and feeding that into resilience forums. So there's a whole architecture of which we are part and representing the most significant urban area within the Norfolk landscape. Can I thank, obviously, people for all the work that they've done? And I'm also thinking here about elected city councillors, been playing an active part in their wards, supporting voluntary organisations, as well as doing the day-to-day work of being a councillor, making the decisions that we need to make to help people get through the pandemic. Norwich has been fortunate in the fact that it's had a very low, relatively low infection rate and a small number of fatalities. Though for the people who have suffered very badly from the pandemic in terms of getting through it, but recovering, and sometimes recovery is slow, and those people who have died, our hearts go out to those people. But actually, people have been in the city very good. They've taken the lockdown seriously. I think that's why Norwich has seen one of the lowest death rates in the UK. But it hasn't gone away. It will be with us for some time. We're not quite sure what form that will be, whether there will be a second wave, whether it's something we have to live with for a number of years going ahead, awaiting a vaccine and so on. So we have to be very active in our thinking, and this report is not exactly a first stab at that, but it is a framework which is going to develop over time. And I and others have been involved in meetings with a range of our partners, particularly using the framework of Norwich 2040. And, we've been testing some of the principles of that partnership, some of the priorities of that partnership. And what I can tell you is that the overarching framework of our 5 key ambitions remains, but how we deliver those and how those ambitions are reshaped is something which we're going to have to work through and reflect on. So there needs to be some fresh thinking. I think there is an interesting point in time which is comparable to, say, the end of the Second World War, where when people reflected on the experience of that traumatic event, they didn't certainly want to go back to 1939. They actually wanted to go forward to a more optimistic future. And of course, the institutions like the welfare state were built, the National Health Service, house building programs, public ownership of key institutions, full employment, and the benefits of that were felt in terms of an unprecedented growth in living standards. And local government was a key partner in building those structures. If we think back to 2008, 2009, the financial crash, the impact of that was different. It opened up a decade of austerity, and on that occasion, the role of local government was actually to take a disproportionate hit in terms of cuts in its funding, and through those cuts, impacts on local communities and the services that they require. So the question at this particular point in time is, will this government take the same path once the threat of COVID-19 has abated? What we've learned from this experience and what government has learned is just how important local government is in delivering what has to happen on the ground. And of course, we've had a recent announcement about the track and test and isolate infrastructure, which is now in the hands of local public health and local government. We have written to the Prime Minister to remind him of just how important local government has been as a key partner alongside the NHS. And we were encouraged initially that the government said that they would pick up the cost, the impact on local government in terms of its funding streams, that we should spend what we needed to spend. And sadly, government has started to pull back from that position. So there is a debate that has to be had with central government about giving a fair deal to local government. They should not impose upon us in-year cuts in budgets that were set as recently as February. And the point is, this is not just a spat, you might think, between central and local government around funding. Actually, if that funding is not provided, that is effectively a punishment for the citizens of this city who have worked hard to make sure that that pandemic was kept under control. And they will be the ones who will be losing the services. They'll be the ones who will be facing vulnerabilities. There is, frankly, in my view, a need for a major revamp in thinking across all institutions of government, and certainly in key areas like the funding of local government and the support that people need going forward to get through what has been a traumatic set of experiences. So what we've demonstrated, I think, by this document is just how important the Council and its partners have been in delivering what has been needed, and will continue to do that. Second thing is, it is a plan for recovery to help the city recover, the wider area recover, and as part of a recovery plan for government. The last thing I would say is this, that this is a developing document. It's coming to Cabinet, but it's going to be coming to full Council. There will be a range of divergent views. There'll be some creative ideas, and we want to be able to draw on all of those things in terms of helping us go forward. So I'm asking for, in a political sense across all parties, a degree of solidarity on these issues, but without inhibiting anybody from making contributions that they can bring to the table to help us make a better recovery for the city. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for those words, Councillor Waters. If I can now call on the Chief Executive, Stephen Edmonds, to say a few words from an executive perspective.
So the report covers three main areas: the impact of COVID on Norwich and on Norfolk, the Council's response to the virus, and some of the priorities for the future as we look towards recovery. The document's intended to form a blueprint for recovery and to frame the decisions and the priorities that the Council takes over the next 12 to 18 months. As Councillor Waters has said, it's a live document. It will continue to be updated and will continue to evolve as things progress. I'll say a little bit more about some of those kind of three strands, but in terms of next steps, we will be consulting with partners on the plan. We have all started that already. We had a meeting of City Vision partners a couple of weeks ago where we talked about recovery. And we'll also be consulting with wider residents, businesses and others through the channels we've got available to us as a council. And we'll develop a more detailed action plan for each of the themes, which covers the actions set out in the document, but also others which emerge. And in some areas, we're likely to see more detailed strategies develop relating to those themes set out in the recovery part of the document. So, for example, when we're talking about harnessing social capital, I'm envisaging us developing a more detailed community participation strategy to set out what we actually mean by that and how we will take that forward. We're going to be developing a dashboard of measures across a range of social and economic indicators so that we can scrutinise and measure progress. We'll continue to monitor this through CLT and through Cabinet, alongside our wider corporate plan measures. But in terms of delivery, we can't do that. We can't do it alone. The council needs to play the role of as a convener of partners across the city to help oversee the recovery of the city, both in the short term and over the longer term. As the document sets out, there's a proposal to use already strong partnerships through the City Vision partners, and also look at other forums such as the Good Economy Commission to look at the local economy, and other forums that we can and may need to set up to look at specific aspects of the recovery as it evolves. So briefly, in terms of the three areas of the report, in terms of the impact of COVID, as the leader has said, the number of cases of COVID and the number of deaths in Norfolk and Norwich has been relatively low. Reports have shown that Norwich has got the third lowest in the country in terms of local authority area. I think that's due to a range of factors. Partly geography will play a part. Demographics of the city will also play a part, which is very different to the wider county. But I also think the behaviour of our residents, particularly during the kind of the more stringent lockdown measures, plays a massive part in this. And also the excellent work of the NHS, the emergency services, and also the role that the council has played in supporting particularly vulnerable residents who've had to remain home for long periods of time. And I wanted to thank everyone involved, from the NHS, emergency services, and council colleagues for all the work they've done. As we move forward, our objective, as set out in the document, is to protect the health of the population and to avoid a second peak. In terms of our response, we've really focused on keeping vital local services going and supporting vulnerable residents. There have been challenges, but I think overall I would say that the organisation has held up well under significant pressure. Our community response hub, which was set up in the course of a week, a brand new service, shows that we can deliver change at pace. We've made over 6,000 calls to people who need support. And in many cases, those are more than one-off calls. That's ongoing welfare support. We've delivered over 600 food parcels and nearly 500 medicine drops. Our revenues and benefits team have worked extremely hard to pay out grants to small businesses. To date, we've paid out 36.7 million. And that's nearly 3,000 grants to businesses across the city, which is the best performance in Norfolk in terms of the percentage of money paid out, and places us in the top 40 of over 300 councils nationally. And then this week we've also launched a discretionary grants scheme for businesses which weren't eligible for the first round of grants. We've used hardship fund money from the government to reduce council tax bills to zero for nearly 4,000 residents who are facing financial hardship. And we've worked hard to deal with an increase in demand for homelessness and emergency accommodation. All rough sleepers in Norwich have been offered accommodation, and we've worked closely through our partnership programme to ensure that the wraparound support, physical, mental health support is available. In terms of our recovery, there are a number of themes that are set out. This is talking about recovery both for the organisation and for the city. For the organisation, I think there's a really big opportunity here to embed some of the learning and some of the different ways of working that we've had to put in place quite quickly. I think we've shown that we've become a more flexible organisation. Colleagues are able to work from home, to work more flexibly, and that will need to continue over the medium to longer term. And I think that's got an opportunity there to change the culture of the organisation and to provide a better work-life balance for our staff. So we do want to embed that learning. We want to apply it to all of our services, to reimagine those services and deliver them differently where we can, particularly in response to changing behaviours of our residents. Supporting the vulnerable will continue to be a big priority. So in terms of homelessness, rough sleepers, we are now starting to move people into more sustainable accommodation, and we'll be working closely with the county and with pathways programs to ensure that wraparound support is there in the short term, and then over the longer term, looking at things such as access to skills and employment, so we can look at longer term pathways out of poverty for the most vulnerable. We're actively working with the county to look at how we can encourage social distancing in the city as it begins to open up again, with non-essential shops opening on Monday. and also promoting sustainable transport and trying to encourage people to leave their cars at home. Over the longer term, housing and regeneration will play a big part of the city's recovery. And the report talks about developing a pipeline of sites for development, and also specifically reference a couple of opportunities. One at the former Mile Cross depot site, which has potential to develop 200 council homes, and the biggest regeneration opportunity in the east of England at the former Carrow Works site at East Norwich, which has the potential to deliver 4,000 homes over the longer term. Arts and culture has been impacted heavily, and that's really a key part of the fabric of the city. And as the city starts to come back, the arts, culture and heritage will play a huge part in that. We're working with the sector, and we'll be working with them to look at how we can deliver events in the city differently going forward. Finally, I do need to make reference to the impact that this has had on the council's finances. We will continue to lobby government to ensure that councils are fully compensated for both the additional income, the additional expenditure, but also the income that's been lost. But we have to take the position that we have to argue for the best and plan for the worst. Therefore, we do need to look at how we can make savings in case the government doesn't come forward with more funding this year and over the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So what I propose to do now is we'll move on to section 4, which is the City Council's response. I've got a couple of questions on that. While I'm asking my questions, if members could use the chat function to indicate to me that they wish to speak. Councillor Driver is using the indicate by waving function that he wishes to say something. Let's unmute you there. Councillor Driver.
Yes, thank you, James. Can I just say first, this is one of the best reports I've seen from the City Council, and it's gone into a lot of detail.
Councillor Driver, I wondered if you were just making a... Do you have a question that you want to ask at some point moving forward?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I'll put you on the list then. I thought you were making a point about the functioning of the meeting, so we'll add you onto the list. So I'll ask a couple of questions, and I've had some members who've indicated via the messaging function already that they wish to ask. Clearly, Councillor Carlo, because she's joining us via telephone, can't use that function. So what I will do is come to Denise at points just to see whether there's anything she needs to add. I think that's probably going to be the best way we'll deal with that. So I'll kick off. So my question relates to paragraphs 423, 428 around the community response hub and the sort of the timing of the letter. So from the middle of March onwards, we had mutual aid groups across the city who were providing support to vulnerable residents before local authorities were able to gear up. Many of these are still operating, meeting a specific need where the council cannot. Could the council have done anything to get the response operating sooner, or was that timetable driven by central government funding and logistics? Thank you.
I mean, happy to take that. I think we moved as quickly as we could on this, and as quickly as the government, essentially the government put in place a scheme around shielding the most vulnerable, and that's a complex scheme. And it became clear that when that scheme was launched, that the role of local government, which from the outset was assumed to be relatively minor, actually, it soon became clear that the role of local government was going to become much bigger. And I think you'll see that councils across the country stepped in. And I think initially we were there to kind of just provide a safety net for people who, as the government shielding scheme developed over a course of probably about a month, that the local government would be there to kind of provide a stopgap. What quickly became apparent is that actually through its local knowledge and its partnerships, that local government was actually going to have to provide a more significant role. So hence the scaling up of the service over the period of kind of March into April. And we have working with county, we have provided significant support. As I say, 6,000 calls, So we've proactively contacted every person on the government's shielded list. And we've also ensured that everyone who's contacted us through the county that's then been triaged down to us or directly to us in response to the letter that's sent out, we've ensured that everyone has been contacted and their needs have been assessed. Our priority has been to, in the first instance, to point people towards local community support. But where that isn't in place, then we have stepped in and we have provided direct provision. And as we look to kind of wind down this support over the kind of medium term, recognizing that we are not resourced to continue to provide this direct level of support, we will continue to work with the local community to ensure that people are signposted to that support. But we will be providing that safety net for people who don't have access to friends and family and other support networks.
Great, thanks very much for that answer. I've got another question, and then I'll move on to the other members who've indicated. Stephen, actually, I think this question probably falls to you as well, and it relates to the small business grants in paragraph 440 and 441. I'm aware of organisations who were eligible on paper, but actually had no detriment to their business as a consequence of the lockdown. Was the council required by government to carry out any form of means testing for the disbursement of this public money, or was its role simply to get it paid out as quickly as possible? Thank you.
There wasn't any means testing. The kind of guidance from government was clearly focused around speed of getting the money out, but there was a degree of due diligence, but the focus was very much on speed, recognizing that businesses, that in many cases their customers have simply disappeared in many cases overnight. So there was a focus on speed. There was clearly a level of due diligence that the team had to put in place, but the government actually wrote to councils to say that they would be accountable for any fraud in the system to take that pressure off of government. So the focus was on speed, but there was a degree of due diligence in terms of checking bank account details, in terms of checking the information that we held for businesses, but it was about us being as streamlined as possible because the emphasis was making sure that businesses had access to funding during a very difficult time for them.
Great, thanks very much for that answer. So far I've got Councillors Osborne, Fulton McAllister, Driver and Carlo, who I'm aware have something to say. So I'll come to Councillor Osborne, who was first up. Thanks so much, Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chair. And I think I've got to say actually something similar to what Councillor Driver was going to say, that I think I'm really impressed with the speed and the overall vision of the report that's been put together. I think I've asked colleagues in other councils about where they're at with this sort of post-COVID recovery planning, and I've seen that seem to be as far ahead as Norwich. So I think the council can be congratulated on that. My question was going to be on something that Stephen mentioned towards the end of his presentation about finances, and obviously one of the main sources of finance or income for the council recently has been commercial property investment and revenues from that, and we've seen that Travel Lodge is going to the administrators and requesting further rent deferrals. I suspect that other areas of the council's commercial property investments will be affected. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about that, and whether there's going to be a revision of the commercial property investment strategy, because I noticed that the capital programme is going to be revised and the economic strategy is going to be revised, but the commercial investment strategy is not mentioned.
I think the leader wants to answer that one. I have to chip in.
Okay, so the first thing to say is that investment in commercial assets has not been a novelty or a recent thing. It's been an integral part of the funding of the council over many decades. And the particular investments that we've made in the last 4 or 5 years have been a response fundamentally to cuts in central government grant. The revenue support grant was a needs-based model looking at the particular circumstances of each local authority. And at one time, it used to pick up a whole strand of issues in relation to the city around deprivation, about the issues that urban areas have, and made it, and size of population, profile of population, and so on. Now that's effectively disappeared. And so what that resulted in was a significant funding gap. We've been a very successful council in mitigating the impact of government cuts over the past decade to provide important services to people, and particularly people who are in vulnerable circumstances. There's also been an economic strand to that, because in terms of purchase of commercial assets, they are selected carefully. A number of those assets have been purchased in the city, so they have possibilities around a wider regeneration at some point. So had we not had the £500,000 income stream from those assets, then it would have put pressure on our budgets and on the services that we provide. And I would say, I know I was anticipating this question, that colleagues who are critical of that model, which we have had to do in response to the end of significant amount of funding through revenue support grant, has been, I think, the most practical and measured solution. But I haven't heard what alternatives there are to have done that, undertaken that strategy in the light of decisions made by central government. So for the time being, yes, there is pressure on the businesses. I mean, something in the order of about £400 billion has been put in place to support businesses and the economy. So I think the question that one would ask in a more fundamental way, and it would be a question asked of government, is maintaining that level of investment until there can be a proper economic recovery. So what we've tried to do through, as Stephen was saying, through the grants that central government provided us to distribute, is to do that in a speedy and effective way. But going forward, we're having to negotiate with our commercial tenants, for example, in places like the airport industrial estate and so on, to see what we can do to help to cushion them, to defer payments. We did that with the market, and so on. And the issue is central government making sure it carries forward its funding support for the economy to enable it to get back on an even footing, and in that way, we will then get the benefits from businesses that a commercial income stream that will improve. But I can tell you now, I'm making arguments all the time about the proper funding of local government and a return to central government tax-backed funding, which is the best way in which local authorities can plan for services going ahead and delivering for people in the city.
Thank you very much for your answer there, Councillor Waters. Councillor Osborne, I believe you have a supplementary question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Waters. I mean, I accept and understand that the council has been driven to this by funding cuts from central government, and I don't dispute the principle of the council having to invest in commercial sources of income. My question is about the kinds of investments that have been made and whether those are particularly vulnerable now, given that they are based on tenants and rents and business, businesses providing those rents when we're entering a period of profound economic uncertainty. And other councils have, there are alternatives such as investing in renewable energy schemes. Warrington Borough Council is a leader on that. They've been issuing community bonds to their to the communities to raise finance for investing in solar power that they hope will generate in the order of £2 million in returns. So my question is whether the council will be revising the kinds of properties that are invested in, or the kinds of commercial investments that are made. You seem to have frozen.
No.
Can people still hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, can people still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question is whether they'll be revising the kinds of commercial investments that are going to be made, especially as one of the focuses of the one of the key themes of the recovery plan is the environment and the clean green economy, and this would be able to invest in future-looking sources of income that would also support environmental objectives.
Okay, well, as I said in my introductory remarks, this is a document which is a working document going forward. I can't say what the condition of the economy is going to be in the coming months. I'm hoping that central government will recognise that it still has a vital role to play in investing in supporting economic activity and making sure that businesses as well as public institutions like local government are able to survive the experience. So yes, one will look at that landscape and one will make judgments based on the opportunities that come up, but also by virtue of understanding what will be a good investment in what will be inevitably a changed economy.
Thank you for that. Just for members who've been frantically waving or messaging or attempting to indicate in one form or another, so far I've seen Councillors Fulton McAllister, Driver, Carlo, Ryan, Giles, McCartney Gray and Graham who wish to contribute to the meeting. So if anyone else has anything they want to say, please drop me a message via the chat function. So without any further ado, Councillor Fulton McAllister, you were next in the list, please.
Yes, so I don't know if this is best addressed by Stephen or Alan, but my question is on sections 4.15 to 4.22, and is about, with our changes to service delivery, whether we would, and also the fact that we may not be reimbursed by national government because we must be planning for the worst case scenario, whether we are expecting any compulsory redundancies, and I may well have a follow-up to the answer.
I'm happy to answer. I mean, we will. So you know, the report sets out the latest position on the financial impact of COVID, which is significant, £7 million in year overspend. We do have a level of reserves, quite a healthy level of reserves that we can put towards meeting that overspend. But we need to ensure that we're also kind of keeping a percentage of that reserves for future years, because recognizing, as the report does, that actually this is going to probably be more than a one-off hit. It will be a sustained impact over a number of years as you start to see things like, you know, council tax collection, potentially business rates, etc., being impacted over the next few years. So we do need to look at options to save things in year. We are doing that as an active piece of work. You know, in doing that, there are kind of two focuses. As far as possible, avoiding kind of visible cuts to frontline services, but given that we're having to do this on the back of kind of a decade of significant cuts to our budget, that becomes increasingly harder to do. And then kind of secondly, we want to avoid as far as possible impact on the workforce. But having said all that, we at this stage it's the process of putting forward options to look at how we can get more money in and also make savings. Now, I think in the immediate short term, we've put on a kind of a freeze on things such as recruitment, so keeping posts vacant for as long as possible, and any recruitment will be signed off through CLT. We're also doing a kind of line-by-line review of our budgets, because clearly that areas will be overspending, but other areas such as our events team and all the money we spend on events clearly will be underspending, because we're not going to be doing any big events for the foreseeable future. And we're also talking to budget managers to ensure that non-essential spending is curtailed. So it's kind of, there's a series of options we're looking at. But as far as possible, we want to avoid redundancies, and we also want to avoid cuts to frontline services. But at this stage, until we've kind of completed that work, we can't rule anything out.
Yeah, I suppose the only thing I'd add to that is that over the last 10 years, where the local authorities have made redundancies and compulsory redundancies, but we haven't done that, and that's the sort of context in which we're looking at the challenges ahead in the next year. And Stephen has described a sort of a structure and a hierarchy of options that we look at. And what we want to do is we want to be in a position where we can maintain those important frontline services and the hard-working staff that have helped deliver those and have worked incredibly hard through this pandemic period.
Thank you for the answer there. Councillor Fulton McAllister, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes. So thank you both for that. So it sounds like it's not going to be something that the council is able to rule out at this stage. And as that's the case, would it be, I don't know our internal recruitment procedures, but first of all, are we looking at things like only internally advertising jobs before they go to external advertisement? I know you've said there's a recruitment freeze, but at some point it may be necessary to recruit for essential positions. And if those essential positions are required, they're very unlikely to be the positions which are going to be made redundant, otherwise you wouldn't have gone to recruitment, and therefore will those be advertised internally before being advertised externally? One of the things I also want to highlight is, obviously, if we're making more than 20 redundancies at any point, we've got a duty to consult collectively, and that's for a minimum of 30 days. However, I think that given the effort that our workforce has put in, we owe them a lot more than just the bare minimum consultation period. And I would hope that we would be consulting as quickly as possible, if it is at all an option, so that we can immediately let people know the results, and they can there's enough opportunities for internal redeployment potentially, and also they get as much notice as possible for any potential job seeking, rather than waiting until the last moment to go through a consultation process. So any reassurances on that would be appreciated.
Again, it kind of just to reiterate, and it's important we don't get ahead of ourselves here. We will want to avoid as far as possible any compulsory redundancies. I've always been someone who has sought to kind of look to internal talent, and it's just been announced today that our new head of IT, digital and customer services is Julia Medler, who many of you will know is the current customer services manager. And Julia went through a process to get that role. It's a key role to deliver many of the aspects of the recovery plan. So I'm always really pleased to see internal recruitment. So yes, so in every case, staff will have the opportunity to apply for roles, and you know, we would follow procedures in terms of consultation, and you know, I haven't been here long enough to kind of know the ins and outs of the council's policies here, but I would also want to ensure that there's a process of redeployment where possible. So yes, we absolutely, if we were to go down this road, we would ensure that those things were taken forward.
I just add one thing, James, that we have a very close working relationship with the unions at City Hall. So it's and they've been working very closely with the council throughout this pandemic period.
Okay, thank you. So next up, we have Councillor Driver. Councillor Driver, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to say something about the report. I think the report is very good, and it goes into detail quite a bit, and how quick you got out, I think it's excellent as well. But there's also, I know it's a work in progress, but there's a hell of a lot missing in here. The first thing I want to say is I think Norwich has done really well with a disease. I'm going to call it disease. And the low figures we got, with the third best in the country. The other two are really small little places. So Norwich as a city has done really excellent. But I would like to go on to the purpose of the report. And the purpose of the report, you talk about how many people have died in Norwich, how many people have got the virus in Norwich. Could you tell me, this is one of my questions, whereabouts in Norwich this has happened? Is it in the deprived areas? Because I'm talking about Lakenham as one of the deprived areas of my own. I'm talking about Marcross, a bit in Canton Grove, and a bit in Quiln where the leader is. And also on changes to service delivery on 416, I see there's a 37% increase being made by online. Have we got any data to say where these people are coming, whereabouts in the city they're actually coming online is? I mean, in Lakenham, there's a lot of people, they've got computers. So has a figure from poor areas not been able to contact the council so well, but for affluent places, they can do it a lot better. Now, I know this is a work report, there's no figures in there at all. Also about lockdown, if a virus actually spreads more in Norwich, what's the figure about lockdown, and are we doing specific areas? Now, if the virus is well, I don't know where the deaths have occurred or where everyone's got the virus, but you look at the map and I can see Lakenham might have had a few, but I'm not sure. No one's told me these figures. So I'm just worried about a lockdown. Would you do it per ward, or would we look at a city? Who would actually pay for it? Would it be down to Norwich? Would it be down to Norfolk? And who would give the order of a local lockdown? And I've got a few other questions, but I'll let you answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Driver. I think we possibly jumped around a little bit there in terms of the report, possibly your last point related to section 5, which we're not quite on yet in terms of the local lockdown. But
no, section 4.
I'd ask Stephen perhaps to address.
Yeah, let me see if I can kind of cover as many of those as possible. In terms of the deaths, just to be really clear, the figure for deaths are deaths in hospital. So that will be deaths in people who have passed away in Norfolk and Norwich Hospital. We don't have the data of where those people are from. It's the hospital data. The point about, I mean, I guess the wider point is, and it kind of some of the later areas of the report kind of get into this a little bit. So clearly there are areas of Norwich which suffer from deprivation, in some places, quite extreme deprivation compared to other places in the country. And I think our assessment would be, as the report sets out, in many cases, families were kind of struggling to get by before this pandemic came along, and it's likely that this would have impacted those families and those individuals even further, and that will rightly form the kind of basis of our response. In terms of the data, this is a new disease, a new virus, and the data is pretty sketchy at this stage. So we don't know. I don't think we know, unless Nikki wants to come in. I don't think we know where who's accessing our services online. The data in the report is kind of accessing national data that's out there at the moment. Local data isn't yet available. That will become available, and there's a whole section on here around developing a dashboard of data and a dashboard of measures, and that will evolve over time as local data develops and becomes clearer. So it's very early stages in terms of the data, but it will evolve over time, and we'll make sure that kind of how we measure it and the data we use keeps track of that. I don't know if Nikki wanted to add anything.
Yeah, just unmute myself. Yeah, I think with a number of people online, Councillor Driver, that's about getting people who can go online to go online. It's not about forcing people online who can't. We've had the phones open all this time, and teams of staff working as normal on the phones. So that resilience has been there for people. The thing we haven't had is lots of people coming to City Hall, partly because it was not safe, and if we've tried to take people's appointments kind of over the phone. So our benefits team, our customer services team, and our home options team have all been working on the phone and online. Our home options team have obviously been working with people in person, because that was the nature of that, because we kept our homelessness section open throughout all of this. So my view is, if we can keep the people who've chosen to go online wherever they are, if they can transact with us that way, that gives us more resilience to be able to spend more time with people who maybe need more help from us and more time.
Thank you for that. Councillor Driver, do you have any supplementary questions? Oh, he's
not at the moment, thank you.
Okay, thank you. In which case, I will unmute Councillor Carlo, who is next on the list, please. Councillor Carlo.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. So my question is, as we move out of lockdown and government resources for local authorities and the different economic groups begins to tail off, the needs of people on 0 hours and people who lose their jobs or people who are self-employed will remain just as great, especially if unemployment increases. And so my question is, how will local authorities in general, and Norwich in particular, help to support those people and meet basic needs if there is no additional funding from government? Thank you. That's my question.
I can pick that one up if you like, Chair. We knew before the pandemic, as you did, Denise, that large parts of the working age population were working in insecure and poorly paid employment. So what we will continue to do, working with our other partners from the Living Wage Foundation, but also working with a broader network of employers. Now, Councillor Fulton McAllister was involved with me in an initiative which was a Good Employers programme, and we had a meeting involving the Chamber of Commerce, Business Improvement District, some of the larger employers in the city, trades unionists, and other public bodies, including this local authority, to work on a Good Employers Charter, which would set benchmarks around those terms and conditions and to work to improve them. So that's a piece of work which is underway. And I think what this particular pandemic has revealed is that even people who are self-employed, who have worked in got secure incomes from the work that they do, certainly were shocked when that work dried up, as inevitably it was likely to do in most cases, and that the social security system did not come in and provide them with a cushion of support. And the refrain one heard on television interviews was, "I've paid taxes for 30 years, I've never been unemployed, and now I'm having to go through the minefield of universal credit." And at the end of the road, the golden bag is filled with £94.46p. So I think there's a wider awareness now of the shortcomings of the social security system, and one would hope, and we would certainly be working to mobilise sentiment in the city to put pressure on government to improve those welfare structures. But I think compared to a number of other areas, one of the reasons why we were able to mobilise so quickly is because the experience for this local authority and for people in Norwich is that there are a lot of people who are vulnerable, and vulnerable for a lot of the time. So the infrastructure that we've put in place in terms of providing advice and support, in terms of making sure that we can help people's bottom line financially through things like cheaper energy, and making sure that we have in place the scheme which we continue around the council tax reduction scheme, and making sure that people get all the benefits to which they're entitled. But your question raises that bigger issue, which I raised in my introduction, which is, are we going to see a significant change in mindset by government? And if we're not going to see a change in government's mindset, is there sufficient political and public sentiment to get those changes made, which means that we go forward with more people in secure employment and better paid employment, and supported at times when they need a decent social security system. And I hope that's one of the things that we collectively as parties on the council will be advocating for.
Thank you for that answer, Councillor Waters. Councillor Carlo, do you have a supplementary you'd like to ask at this stage?
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Waters. Yes, I applaud all the work that the City Council has been doing on setting up networks to support vulnerable people. I suppose my question is, in the immediate short term, when the community hub is closed, that Norwich has been running, I'm wondering about the transition to food delivery hubs and the degree of coordination that the City Council provided in ensuring people across the city receive basic food parcels. I'm thinking about that transition as well. And just to ask Councillor Wright here, do we have opportunities for raising points about the recovery report, please, or should we put them all into our one sort of contribution here? Thank you.
In terms of raising points that could go forward to Cabinet later on, is that the or item 5? So what I was about to suggest, actually, because another member has just messaged me that I think if your questions want to be around section 5 now as well, I think that's an appropriate time to sort of move on to there. So questions from both section 4 and the blueprint section, which is section 5.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Well, if I can, I won't make any more points now, but if I can then have a slot later on, please, James, for raising points on the question 5. That would be great. Thank you very much. But my immediate thing is about the food delivery. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are actively looking at how we can kind of wind down the work of the hub in a managed and appropriate way. Demand has dropped quite considerably over the last couple of weeks. So, and I expect that demand to continue to come down. Our approach is very much about ensuring that kind of we're still engaging with people, but we're pointing them towards community support. And I think we're very lucky in Norwich to have a significant support available within our communities. There are other kind of groups that have kind of stepped up and have provided that support, whether it's kind of more formal charities and organisations or kind of looser kind of neighbourhood community engagement, community groups that have sprung up. So there is a work stream that's currently looking at how we do this over the course of the summer, but doing it in a kind of managed way, and also ensuring that, you know, if we do need to kind of scale things back up, I guess the other risk here is as the test and trace scheme evolves and starts to kind of come into play, there may be a need to provide a level of ongoing support. Our approach, as it has been to date, has always been to try and signpost people to that support within their community, but we do want to make sure that people aren't slipping through the net. So that's what we're looking at, and again, this is going to be a coordinated approach across the county to ensure that kind of all parts of the county are moving at the same time on this.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ryan, I believe you're next, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to change direction here with the questioning a bit now. On Monday, most of the shops in the city centre will reopen. That means there's a possibility of thousands of people returning back to Norwich city centre to shop and go about their business. Could you give me some idea, Alan or Stephen, about our plans about social distancing in the city centre? There has been talk about a policy of signs and lines on the pavement. Clearly, this could be very difficult to implement. Could you give us some idea what we're going to be doing as a city council to ensure that people do stay apart, do keep to 2 metres as far as possible, and also give us some idea of any roads that might be closed to motor cars and be cyclists only or pedestrian only? So if you could advise me on that, that would be very, very helpful. Thank you.
Do you want to start, Stephen, or should I?
I don't mind. Do you want to have a go and then I can chip in?
Yes, of course. The first thing to say is that the government is sort of seeking to move things along rather briskly on this. Every day is an announcement about something new that will be open. But the first thing to bear in mind, of course, is that we no longer have a joint highways authority. So any plans that we have to be done in consultation with the county, and the county have to sign them off. But we've moved very quickly on this, working with the Business Improvement District to get signage, social distancing signage out and around in the city centre. You've seen some of that in the market, which opened at the beginning of last week. So we have a plan for that, which really needs the sign off from the county as soon as possible, so we can start to get all of that social distancing signage around the city centre in place. We also obviously clearly want to widen pavements to enable people to move around. In some cases, if there are narrow pavements, for example, in the lanes around Bridewell Alley, we're looking at sort of one-way systems to enable people to manoeuvre around without too much proximity. And there's also what we would like to do is have places like Magdalen Street, St Benedict's, Upper St Giles, Exchange Street. These are the kind of places where we think that there should be road closures. We're putting that together as a proposal to the county council, and there will also be a responsibility for the licensing function, where businesses are saying, well, for us to be viable, we need to be able to expand beyond the confines of the building. So applications for using spaces put out tables and chairs and so on. And so this is a rather kind of concertinaed timetable, given that by early July, much of the city will be open. So those things need to be in place very quickly. And as I've been closely following this with Stephen, and I've spoken to the leader of the county council about the urgency of getting that in place. We have prepared the plans. We've asked our officers to go out and start consulting with people, just telling them what we're thinking about doing, and to get some views from those businesses and those residents in some of those areas where we're looking at street widening or road closures, so that we can work to what is a tight timetable. It's very much in the foreground of our thinking as a matter of urgency.
Chair, I have one supplementary to that. It comes back to the County Council. As I said at the start, the shops are reopening on Monday. To what extent is the County Council on board with this? Are we waiting for them to respond on this, or will we just go ahead with these things anyway on Monday to get things going? To what extent are the County Council holding things up here?
Well, I think, so the County Council have got to sign off all of these arrangements across all the districts in Norfolk. We have impressed on the County Council that we should be the priority in getting stuff signed off because of what we are as the major urban area. We are being proactive. Let me put it this way, Roger. We are being proactive in preparing the ground for enabling road closures and pavement widening to take place when the County Council gives us the nod. So we have also offered, additional resources should they need that in terms of any capacity issues they have in terms of signing off the city. And we have the full support of the Business Improvement District and businesses across Norwich to be able to get all of these things in place. So one is they just have to say yes, and then things will fall into place. But we'd like them to say yes sooner rather than later.
So we're waiting for County Hall to get their act together, are we?
We're waiting for County Hall to look at our very good, sensible and adventurous proposals, because one of the other issues is that government has putting funding in for saying, well, we want people in future learning from the experience of the benefits of less air pollution, the fact that people have found the pleasures of walking or cycling to facilitate all of that. So we are partly about preparing for the city to open, but we're also about the idea of thinking radically about how the city can be redesigned to enable a different way of a modal shift, I suppose, is the shorthand way of doing that. So we want the County Council to be ambitious for us and ambitious with us.
Thank you. Thanks for your answer.
Thank you. I'm just use Chair's prerogative to ask a supplementary to Councillor Ryan's train of thought. I've been contacted by someone who's concerned about how the sort of changes to road layouts and pavement layouts will impact on those with visual impairments. I just wonder how that's being factored in, because at the one point it's important for the businesses in St Benedict's, say, for example, to be able to use the pavement for their trading, but that has a big impact on those who are visually impaired. And this has come up before, and we've looked at the issue of A-boards. So I just wonder how that's factoring into the thought process. Thank you.
Yeah. Integral to the process.
Great, succinct, thank you very much. Councillor Giles, you're next, please.
Hi, thank you for the report. Councillor Wright, I've got 4 aspects I'd like more detail on. Should I ask 2 and then move on to, then give people an opportunity to answer and then move on to the other 2?
Yeah, that would be good, I think. Thank you, yes.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you for the report. It's very detailed. I'm minded when thinking about the government's approach to the recovery of what happened in 1945, when a government was elected into power who said that we've won the war and now we need to win the peace. Well, we haven't beaten the virus yet, but we're fighting it, and we need to make sure that we build back better once we have beaten the virus. I'm very concerned that the heroes in our public sector who the government got us to clap for 5 weeks now face losing their jobs possibly if the government doesn't keep its word on reimbursing local authorities on the costs and loss of income they've incurred due to the pandemic. I was wondering if we could have more details. Obviously, report potential £3.3 million of savings need to be made this financial year, with further savings required in subsequent years should the government not keep its word. And I was wondering if we'd have some detail as to which services would be most at risk, and for any frontline services, what opportunities for scrutiny of that there will be. And the second aspect was regarding the town's investment fund and our bid for that, as to details of what we can bid for, where we are in terms of what we are going to bid for, and what kind of things we could get out of that. Thank you.
Okay.
Happy to pick up the point about the budgets. As I said earlier, this is an active piece of work, so colleagues from across services are looking at the options. So I don't want to kind of, until I've seen the kind of proposals coming back, I'm not inclined to kind of go out into more detail at this stage. What we will be doing is bringing a report to Cabinet in July, which kind of sets the scene for the kind of wider budget context, and will set out a bit more detail of what we can do to make savings in year. But that work is progressing, and I'm expecting kind of further discussions over the next couple of weeks. In terms of the town's fund, we've set up a governance board with businesses across the city, with central government, and with surrounding districts and the county. And that's been an area of kind of business as usual that has progressed well through the lockdown and through the response. And we are on course again to take I think we're taking a report to Cabinet in July on our bid. It's around infrastructure funding, so we're liaising with businesses to look at what kind of premises businesses might need, what terms of infrastructure support, and we are, I guess, we're looking at the plans through the lens of COVID, because I think what the government is saying is that they want to kind of focus funding on kind of developed plans. So we're having a kind of look again at our proposals through the town's deal to look at where we can move as quickly as possible. But I know that Councillor Waters is also on the board, so may want to come in as well.
Yes, only briefly to say that the funding is up to £25 million, with the exception of 10%, which is revenue. The rest is capital funding. So it echoes what Stephen has said around infrastructure funding, and there's a sense of urgency in government about that sort of shovel ready. What have you got that gets things moving quickly? But what's actually built into the criteria is what I suppose we might describe as a kind of good economy model, which it has to demonstrate that it's going to benefit the local communities, that it's going to provide opportunities for employment, and it's also designed really to sort of pick up on some of the economic priorities that we have, and particularly, for example, in the growth of some of the digital sectors where new possibilities. I suppose the only thing I would say is that what we've got to be careful to do is if we've got this kind of core funding of 25 million, don't want to sort of fritter it around a number of different initiatives. We need to make sure that we are able to present to government a very compelling offer so that we get the funding for something that is seen as fundamentally beneficial to the city, but actually helps. It's got a social dimension to it, but it's also got a strong sort of economic drive to it. So a fuller report will be available at the next cabinet meeting in July.
Thank you. Councillor Giles, did you want to ask you some other questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I want the rollout of full fibre broadband in Norwich. Just some more details about that, particularly about the governance of who is in charge of administering that. And the second was about the master plan for the regeneration of East Norwich. Any more details about that? And what opportunities there will be for consultation and scrutiny over the master planning process. Thanks.
Can I just pick up if I pick up the second one first? The report that's going to Cabinet this afternoon contains within the report stakeholders who will be involved, local communities will be involved in shaping the master planning process. Certainly from the point of view of the council, two fundamentals. One is that we need some good quality public housing as part of that scheme, in other words, council housing. And secondly, we want good quality jobs, because that was a serious blow to the city when we lost Coleman's, Unilever, Britvic, and so on. So that's sort of central to all of that. I would say, just picking up your part of your earlier question, proposed budget changes, service changes, the master plan, and so on, are the things that the Scrutiny Committee, because you put together your own work programme, can ask for, decision making on the council benefits from the contributions of the Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you very much for that, Alan.
Should I answer on the broadband point? If that's, I mean, at this stage, it's relatively early days. I know that colleagues in the economic development team have met with City Fibre on a couple of occasions. In terms of the governance, this is part of this has kind of been discussed and developed through the Townsdeal board. It was discussed at the last board meeting, and it will form part of it will also form part of the Townsdeal plan, which will be going to cabinet in July in terms of governance. And I've also, again, we need to work with the county council on this, because in terms of actually delivering, we need to ensure that we're working with county to allow access to pavements and footways and other kind of infrastructure to implement it. So early discussions have been had with the county, and we'll continue to work closely with them. But I think this is a really good opportunity for Norwich, obviously recognising that kind of people's behaviours have changed, more working from home. I do think the East of England is behind other areas in terms of digital connectivity. So there's a big opportunity here if we can press on and get this delivered.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now, Councillor McCartney-Gray, you're next, please.
Yeah, I'm looking at section 4.32 through to 4.36. My question is around homelessness, and I wondered if we knew how many rough sleepers turned down assistance from the Pathways team, and those that did turn down assistance, are we still working with them in a compassionate way to try and persuade them to come off the streets?
I'm not aware of any that turned down assistance. The whole benefit of the Pathways programme is it does bring those specialist agencies together, And so your kind of question about compassion is absolutely kind of fundamental to the model. And we've got partners who are very used to dealing with people who have very complex needs and conditions, both physical health, mental health, in many cases substance misuse, and I think the Pathways programme has really, we knew that the Pathways programme was an excellent programme delivering results before this. I think it's in terms of it's responding to the demand and coping as well as it has with that increase in demand, because we have seen homelessness increase in all parts of the country, in Norfolk, but also in Norwich. So that is there. So I'm not sure that anyone's going to turn down advice. The issue is kind of continuing to engage with people, as I say, who do kind of have significant health conditions. And I think as we're now starting to move people into more sustainable accommodation, and that is happening, we're moving people out of emergency accommodation into more sustainable accommodation. We are talking actively to Pathways programme, but also other providers and with the county council to ensure that those wraparound services are there. And this is also, I will also be chairing a kind of cross-county group on homelessness, recognising that quite often, by their nature, people kind of move around the county, and quite often, you'll see people move between different parts of Norfolk, and also between Suffolk and Norfolk, and quite often they will end up in the city for obvious reasons. So it's really important that we take a county-wide approach on this. Other thing to say is that we've also been through our housing teams, we've actively engaged with Dame Louise Casey's new task force that has been set up. We wrote a letter which went, I think, in Councillor Harris's name to Louise Casey, expressing a willingness to work with them, and the team have followed that up with a discussion. So we're continuing to engage with Louise Casey and the task force they've created in central government, because I think we've got a good story to tell, but we also continue to kind of need to access the support that's available both centrally and regionally.
I just add one thing to that. At the beginning of the lockdown, our housing team was proactive rather than reactive to the issue of rough sleeping or homelessness, in the sense that a lot of preventative work was done to prevent people from becoming homeless. So really, throughout the whole of the process, we've always had sufficient accommodation to meet demand. And then that's enabled us, as Stephen said, to start to work with people to get them into permanent accommodation with the wraparound support that they need. Hence, I think the interest that Dame Louise Casey's team has in the work that's been done in Norwich, because we've been recognised as a sort of an exemplar of good practice.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor McCartney-Gray, did you have a supplementary? That at all?
No, I didn't. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In which case, I'll move on to Councillor Graham, please. You're next.
Thank you. I'd like to echo the congratulations for us having a recovery plan, and particularly to welcome Councillor Waters' invitation for wider involvement. So while we're redesigning services, I'd like to ask how we can ensure real transparency and public participation in our partnerships, and especially with the LEP. We're just one partner in the LEP with, I believe, one representative, and it's hugely influential. So is that kind of not exactly chain of command? Is that something that's likely to change?
Thank you. Sorry. All right. Someone's just cleaning the door handles. Precautionary principle. Right. Okay. Yes. I mean, with the LEP, the LEP is a key partner, and it's working with the other Norfolk councils in terms, as with Suffolk, on a recovery plan. The information about the LEP in terms of its report. It is in the public domain. You can go onto their website. What I've tried to do as the representative on the LEP is where there have been key documents, and for example on the work that's been done around climate change, around the work that's being done around inclusive economy, as I've distributed those across political groups, where I think there are some key papers that are coming forward. And I know that were it not for the pandemic, the LEP had been invited to speak to Scrutiny Committee, and I was going to be in attendance at that meeting. But I will continue to send through documents which are central to our purpose. Can I tell you that I'm always making sure that I'm arguing the case for urban economies and cities like Norwich, who of course are contextualized geographically in a very, very wide rural area. But I'm always happy to have questions, any comments to be passed on to the LEP, though it doesn't prevent any councillor actually contacting the LEP about any issues that they have of concern or interest.
Thank you. Councillor Graham, do you have a supplementary to that?
Thank you. I think you've answered my supplementary, but I do have another question on something else. Can I ask it now?
Yeah, you can do. Fire away.
It's about the reference to the circular economy, page 48, paragraph 5110. I'd like to be sure that we take concrete steps. So at the moment it says that looking at a circular economy might include steps to look at it. And I'm wondering whether we should instigate a cross-party working group as a way to make sure that actually happens. So for example, could we use the town fund to adapt existing premises for novel uses? Came up while we were talking about retail. We seem to have a strong focus on the town fund and very high hopes for it. So how can we contribute to the bed?
I mean, I think it ties in with that wider piece of work around the good economy, which is a piece of work we're doing with the University of East Anglia and a whole range of other partners. And there are a number of people who are on the towns board, which are also involved in that local economy. So I suppose in a way what I'm describing is this very large circle of people, and you know, the 2040 work, the range of bilateral or trilateral partnerships that we have. And I do think, Leslie, that what we should be working on, and I know that's a sentiment across the city as well as in the council, is a new economic model. I have to say the existing one is not been particularly effective, and it's been tested by the events that we're still living through. So I think there is ample opportunity for all voices to make a contribution to this citywide discussion, as well as a discussion within the council.
Thank you for that. Councillor Graham, do you have a supplementary to that response?
Only that I haven't received some of those reports, so I'll look into that and I'll look forward to receiving them and getting more involved on the partnership front.
Yeah, drop me a line.
Will do.
Thank you. Just to sort of, I'll give a quick update on where I am in terms of members who've indicated they wish to contribute. I've got Councillors Osborne, Samesi, Carlo, Driver, Fulton, McAllister and Oliver on my list. So I'll come to Councillor Osborne next, but if anyone else wishes to speak, let me know. I've also just had apologies from Councillor Maguire, who's had to leave the meeting now to move on to something else. But Councillor Osborne, you're next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question that actually builds on something that Councillor McCartney-Gray raised, but then I've got, which is on section 4, but then I've got a couple of questions, linked questions on section 5. So if I may, I'll ask one and then the other two. My question on homelessness was, I noticed that Stephen, you said that you were not aware of anyone who'd refused accommodation or assistance. I mean, I've been walking, when you walk around the streets at most times of day, you can see people who've been sleeping rough. And I think that some of the grassroots groups who are providing food and companionship a lot of the time on the streets will also say that they've been feeding or providing food for about 60 people a night. In section 4.35, it says that no rough sleepers have not had an offer accommodation. In section 4.36, it talks about avoiding people seeking potentially unsafe food provision on the streets. My question is whether whether the council acknowledges that that's actually, that people are still going onto the streets, whether that's to sleep on the streets or to get food provision, and whether there's going to be a chance to work with the grassroots groups that are providing that provision to ensure that is done in a more cohesive way.
So, I mean, it's certainly the case that of all the rough sleepers that we're aware of, that all of them have been offered accommodation and assistance, and our approach was very much that we wanted, particularly, you know, kind of through lockdown, when we were kind of reaching peak and close to peak, ensuring that accommodation was available and that medicine was being and other support was being delivered directly to that accommodation, which it was, and also to ensure that food was delivered directly to that accommodation, which it was, and to try and keep people in a safe environment. But clearly that's very difficult to do. You can make the accommodation available, you can make the food available, you can make the medicine available, and all the wraparound support available. You cannot lock people indoors, nor would you want to. And you know, I've been in the city centre recently, this week, and over throughout lockdown, and there are people still on the streets, and I think that just shows the complexity of the issue that you know we're all dealing with. We have reached out to the food providers that we're aware of, and we have offered to work with them, and we'll continue to do that. So, but it is a massively complex issue, and it's not going to be solved quickly. It needs sustained effort. It needs intensive one-to-one support with people to help them to kind of turn their lives around and over the longer term, as I say, pathways out of poverty. But I think the offer we've put in place in terms of accommodation and wraparound support has been comprehensive.
Thank you, and it's good to know that the grassroots groups have been reached out to, because I think they can offer a valuable source of information as well, and contact with people, because they're often the people who know the people who are on the streets best. I'll come on to my other question, which was about a lot of the focus of the sort of recovery proposal seems to be about building housing at the Mile Cross site or at East Norwich, which I think are both projects that I support, especially if there's going to be a focus on environmental sustainability. My question is whether there's also a corresponding opportunities for using retrofit or encouraging retrofitting in the as an industry in Norwich. I mean, we're aware that private sector housing is one of the big areas of lack of energy efficiency and cold homes for people. The council already has a lot of experience and expertise and contacts through the Cozy City programme, so I'm wondering whether there's an opportunity for something like using the council's purchasing power, or something like the Solar Together auction, but doing that for retrofitting, and providing enough sort of kickstarting that economy a bit more, and whether there's also potential to use the town deal funds for that. Relatedly, in terms of reforming the economy, which Councillor Waters mentioned earlier, at the moment it seems that I support the measures that are being done to help businesses reopen safely by restricting cars and opening up to people and cyclists, pedestrians and cyclists, and yet the council is still reliant to an extent on car parking income. And at paragraph, I can't find it right now, but somewhere in paragraph in section 5, it talks about the council taking an agile approach to make sure that car parks reopen. And I'm wondering whether there's going to be a look at reducing the amount of cars coming into the city overall, and how our city economy will work with that, and how that will affect the council's reliance on car parking income.
Well, I think what we clearly have been doing, and goes back 50 years to the first pedestrian street in the United Kingdom, is providing the means by which and the encouragement by which people can walk or cycle. I mean, that's a well-known story, and as I was referring to earlier on, we're very keen. There is some government funding. It's held with the county council to look at innovative ways of people moving around, in our case, around the city, and dealing and making a contribution towards a cleaner environment and so on. In terms of car parks, well, they are an integral part of what we offer as a city, because there are people who live in Norwich who can walk into the city, walk to work, cycle to work, but we are also part of a regional economy. And so there needs to be transport networks that enable people to get into the city. Now, a comprehensive revamp of public transport, particularly buses, would be very welcome. We really need to see a franchising system, local authorities having powers over public transport as they do in London. So all of those things are things that we would want to be involved with. And of course, if we're looking in the end at electric vehicles, coming into the city, much less pollution, then the argument for car parks. If you're making a correlation between pollution and cars and car parks in the city centre, I can see the linkages that you're making. But if technology moves on, then cars are, for the foreseeable future, are going to be with us, but there will be changes going forward. And it comes back to that funding issue, and you related it to purchase of commercial assets for the rental stream. You would need to have a different model of local government finance, and I would support that in terms of a tax-backed model predominantly, because you need that kind of stability, since we're providing services for the long term. But you certainly wouldn't close your car parks right now, because actually one of the critical things that we're facing is that drop off in car park income, which in the current financial model, it's not my favorite model, but it's the government model, so we need to shift them. That would put us in a world of pain, and that you would be looking at lots and lots of redundancies and lots of cuts in services if we lost that income. It's challenging enough as it is, but it raises an interesting point about people moving around the city, and I think we're at the vanguard of that. We will continue to make sure that we provide those opportunities for people to move around the city, and at the same time benefit the environment, but also issues related to climate change.
Thank you for that. Councillor Osborne, I believe you have a supplementary.
Yes, thank you. I'd also want to ask about the retrofitting and insulation measures. But just a point about the car parks. I appreciate that the council is reliant on car parking income, and that there is an argument to say that electric vehicles may reduce pollution in the long term, and yet there is still pollution that comes from electric vehicles, from the tires. But more fundamentally, I think if we're looking to, I want to ask whether the council is looking to a model, an economic model, in the future of and starting now, of making sure that businesses are not reliant on car parking income, car parks, and people driving in, or that the city centre is not reliant on people driving in, because we will see a greater proportion of people working from home in the future. And as has been shown by Norwich's history of pedestrianisation and in other places, that there's economic benefits to opening up to streets, to people, and to cyclists. And also I think that we need to be looking at more, not just in the city centre. A lot of proposals so far seem to have been focused on the city centre for the immediate term things. I think you're on mute.
So the other point I would make, which I forgot to make, is that there really needs to be, a green economy model going forward. So all that retrofit, all that private sector housing, 40% of the private sector housing in this city is substandard. That is something that the Labour Party at the last general election was promoting, continues to promote that as a strategy. If the government wants to show that it's really thinking about these things, and it wants to pump in, a revival of the economy, that is one of the best ways in which you can do it. And we will continue to advocate for that, as I'm sure you will.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We've now got Councillor Sarmezi with a question, please. You're unmuted now, Councillor.
I'm sorry, can you hear me? I do. Thank you. Yes, thank you for the report. And yes, I think it's great that we are getting on with our recovery plan. I've got two things I want to mention, but I'd like to go back a bit. Sorry, it takes a while for my name to come up the list. Stephen, you were talking about, in response to Councillor Driver's question regarding deaths of coronavirus and where those might be. We don't have that data yet, that's understandable. You said that those were deaths in hospital, I think. Do we know about any deaths that took place in care homes within Norwich?
I don't have, I'm not sure what has been published around deaths in care homes locally. So obviously, up until only a few weeks ago, the government was focused on publishing deaths in hospital. Then it changed tack a few weeks ago and started publishing deaths in care homes. I haven't seen any. I haven't seen any data for deaths in care homes in Norfolk or Norwich. But I can let me look into that, and if there is data that's available in the public domain, I can certainly send that through to the committee after the meeting.
Thanks very much for that. And I think what I'm also wondering about is if this unfortunate second wave that everyone talks about does occur, not just that we know what happened in the past, but what are we doing to make sure that if there is a second wave, those residents in care homes, we don't have a repeat performance of what we went before. I think you know what I'm getting at. And the second thing I wanted to mention, I'm all for flexible working. I work for county council actually, and I'm working from home at the moment. I've always worked from home partly. But I think I'm also a union rep in my workplace. And I think it's really important for us to remember that when we're encouraging people to work from home, and that can be a really good thing, it can be beneficial, it can bring with it, though, some other things as well. So I'm sure that we would work closely with unions. I know that Councillor Waters would say this, but I'm sure that we'd be thinking about things like social isolation of working at home, because it brings its challenges. And although I think it can mean that you can kind of be flexible around things like elder care and childcare, it can just end up with meaning that you never get away from those responsibilities and you end up doing 2 jobs on the go. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think a nuanced and sort of more a closer look at all of that, and really looking at what's good for our staff, because I think we should remember, and it has been said, I'm going to say it again, I think the staff at City Hall have been fabulous. So a big thank you and a big, whatever we do for those people. But let's make sure we make sure that continues. But the way the hub was created and they worked, I think it was fabulous. But I just want us to be mindful of the fact that home working does bring its challenges too. Thank you.
If I could just come back on that, I mean, I completely agree with you, Councillor, on all the points you've made. I think for me, this is about giving staff the choice. No one will be kind of forced to work from home. I think my assessment coming into the council, I've only been here kind of 5 months. I've personally always been an advocate of flexible working, because I do think even before what's happened over the last few months, I've never been really able to get my head around the concept of hundreds of people traveling to a big building and kind of sitting there all day and then going home again. And I think even before the last few months, that model has changed for many companies. So, but it is absolutely about giving staff choice. So City Hall will always be an office where people can come and do their jobs. In many cases, they will need to do that. But also we want to, now that we've got the IT capability, and we'll continue to evolve that, staff will have the ability to work more flexibly where they want to, and whether that's coming in the office a bit later, doing some work from home in the morning, spending a day a week. I don't mind that. I think it's all about choice, and I think it's certainly in the kind of short term, until we're kind of over this thing and social distancing is removed, that is going to have to be a kind of a reality, because we are actively looking at how we can ensure that staff who do want to come back to City Hall can do it safely. And if we kind of move desks around and then change internal layouts, we're not going to be able to get everyone back in. So kind of there will need to be an approach for some teams kind of working from home for parts of the week. But it's all about choice. I'd rather be in a position where we're giving that choice to staff than not being able to have that choice. And absolutely, we are actively engaging unions throughout this. We're working with them currently on the kind of safety proposals for getting City Hall open again when it's appropriate to do so.
Thank you. Actually, I'm probably answer Councillor Sarmezi's previous question just from a point of view of deaths in care homes. Having spoken to a number of Norwich-based GPs, although there isn't any specific data that's in the public domain yet, there have been clear cases of excess deaths in care homes as a result of this outbreak, and it will be interesting to see that data when it comes live. I've had a request from a number of members about having a comfort break. So I'm proposing that we do that have a quick 8-minute break, and then reconvene at 12 o'clock. And if you could just turn your cameras off while we do that, and we're looking at just pausing the, that's the best way to handle it, rather than pausing the YouTube video. So if you turn your cameras off, we'll reconvene at 12 o'clock. Thank you.
James,
Keith.
have you any idea how long this meeting will go on?
So at the moment, I have another 6 councillors who've indicated that they wish to speak. I would personally quite like to. I think probably 3 hours is a good maximum length for a meeting. So if we could get it done by 1, that would be absolutely ideal.
Thank you.
But we don't need to draw it out till 1 if there isn't any questioning that requires that to happen. Okay, gradually people are switching their cameras back on. The next person on the list to speak is Councillor Carlo. So I've unmuted you already, Denise.
Yes. Shall I speak now?
Well, I think we're just waiting for Councillor Waters to come back in case your question might be addressed to him.
I'm about to speak, so please.
Oh. So, Councillor Carlo, given we now have Councillor Waters back, we have a few councillors missing, but I think we will kick back off straight away now. So, if you want to fire away with your question, that'd be great. Thanks.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, so I've now got a few points as opposed to questions, and so I'll start. The appendix on impacts emphasises the impact on the city centre economy in relation to retail, but there are a number of gaps in the impacts, notably higher education, and the government's announced a cap on student numbers, and we're likely to see a fall in the number of overseas students, and that's going to result in a big impact on the city centre economy. My concern is generally that we could see very high unemployment in the city in the short term if we look at the different sectors such as retail, higher education, public services and so on. My second point relates to key actions. I want to start with business and local economy, and the third bullet point, this is on page 30, and that refers to continue to identify opportunities to promote sustainable travel in the city centre. But in his forward on traffic management, which is by the Secretary of State, which has been issued as a statutory guidance, the Minister refers to a once-in-a-generation opportunity to deliver lasting transformative change in how we make short journeys in our towns and cities. And the guidance goes on to talk about the need of whole route approaches and creating corridors for buses, cycles, access only on key routes into towns and city centres. And so I'm going to ask if that bullet point could be amended to reflect the need for a whole route approach and not just the city centre, please. My next point is in relation to key actions on climate change and the green economy on page 31. And obviously we would all agree that addressing climate change is critical to the city's recovery and to its resilience. And bullet point 2 refers to further opportunities for reducing carbon emissions across council assets and operations. However, that element only makes up 1.2% of Norwich's carbon emissions. We also need to look to cut Norwich's carbon emissions overall, and the Tyndall Manchester Centre advised Norwich cutting its carbon emissions by 13% per annum over a number of years. And so this is a really substantially different from just looking at the council's assets. And so I'd really like that to be amended, please. And finally, the final point is not really a suggested change, but it's really to point out the scale of change required. Housing regeneration and development, the fifth bullet point, page 30, refers to the Greater Norwich local plan, to make progress on that, to put in place a framework to guide development in the city and to encourage it to be well designed and genuinely sustainable. Well, I have to say that actually the Greater Norwich local plan as it stands is a very, very long way from achieving genuine sustainability, and really some major issues have got to be considered, not least how we fund upgrading the public transport infrastructure across across Greater Norwich. And so I'm not advocating a change to the bullet point here, just really wanting to point out the scale of change that's going to be required. So I think those are my main points at the moment. Thank you very much, Councillor Wright.
Thank you for those points, Denise. Alan, I don't know whether you wanted to had a sort of comment on Denise's suggestions for change there. Obviously, anything that comes out of scrutiny today will be a recommendation to Cabinet, and there's a sort of slight possibility of maybe squaring that circle now. But do you have any sort of thoughts on that?
Well, I think all I would say is that I'm happy to receive, depending on the views of Scrutiny Committee about what they want to bring forward to Cabinet, to have those comments sent forward to us.
Okay, thank you. Got Councillor Driver, who's indicated next. Councillor Driver.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back. I mean, am I the only councillor here worried about coming out of lockdown as fast as that we're coming out? Norwich has been very well, and Chief Executive and Councillor Waters have congratulated the people of Norwich for staying in, and that has kept the virus right down in Norwich. My worry is if something happens. And I know Norfolk is one of the 11 test areas, but I would hope so as well, because it's actually the 5th biggest county in Britain. So I'm glad it is one of the areas. Have we got information of what the county is actually doing? We've actually got our sheltered housing schemes. We've got over 1,000 people, old age pensioners, well, not old age pensioners, older generation who are in our sheltered houses. Have we suggested that to the county we need to test these people? And also, with our very low figures, and I did ask this earlier, never got replies, what figure would we think about shutting down certain areas? I know it's low, so Norwich could actually go right up and get to where other parts of the country actually were. And would you say that was acceptable? I mean, we had over 15,000 yesterday tested positive out of 138 people tested. Now, this is out of something like 62 million people in the country, and I don't believe that we should be following the government's rules on how we're actually opening up the city. Now, I ain't heard nothing. I know we haven't got the laws to progress this, but Norfolk County Council must have a say. And what pressure are we putting on them? I mean, we even had our MP come out to stop schools reopening and actually spoke out against it, which the government's now done a back turn and actually done that. And also, on local lockdowns, if we actually have a lockdown coming on, who's actually going to pay for it, how it's going to be policed, what's going to go on? And these are questions which are not in here. And I just worry me that we're actually opening up our city to the wider areas where coronavirus is more relevant, so we're being told. coming into the city centre and putting this virus onto people in the city. Now, I just want to know is it 5 more people? Or are we talking 100? Do we know any figures? Is anyone talking about any figures? You talk about the one hour rate is 1, but it's also, it could be a lot higher in Norwich itself, or in Manchester, or in Liverpool, or something like that. You talk about the area. Norfolk is a big area. So for being underneath 1, I mean, are we just following the government's rules on this, or are we making decisions as a council ourselves?
Right. Stephen, do you want to start? And I'll come back in.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of okay, so where are we with the test and trace scheme, which I think is at the root of what a lot of the things you're asking. Norfolk, you're right, is one of the 11 kind of beacon authorities, which the government is kind of saying, and the development of a kind of local management plan is actively being taken forward. And that's being developed through the Norfolk Resilience Forum, of which I sit on the strategic body within the Norfolk Resilience Forum, and we've got other city councillors, city council officers in the tactical group. And we're working closely with public health. This is being led by public health within the county, and it's being led by the data around cases and the virus, and that is being modelled for the county. We've got until the end of June to develop that plan. The points you raised around kind of local lockdowns, I think it's fair to say that there's a significant amount of uncertainty around that at the moment, because as you rightly say, councils, local authorities don't have the powers at the moment to lock down areas, and so we'll have to see what comes with that. Whether we see villages, towns, cities locked down, or whether actually it would be more localized lockdowns of perhaps buildings, whether it's a school or an office or something where there's a definable population and a definable outbreak. It may be that's what we're talking about, but this is all being kind of looked at currently in the development of the management plan. I haven't seen any the R data for Norfolk. I think there's published data for the reproductive number for the east of England, which I think puts us in a range of between kind of 0.6 and 0.8. But as you say, this can change over time. We are kind of, the impacts in Norfolk and the east of England have been lower than other areas. You'll have seen the kind of some of the northeast parts of the country and the metropolitan mayors coming out and being kind of stronger around this. Well, first of all, we don't have a kind of a mayoral system in Norfolk, and secondly, I think we haven't suffered from the same level of cases as other parts of the country. But your questions are the right ones, and the kind of concern is that all we've done so far is to artificially suppress the virus. It's still there, and it will continue to be there until a vaccine comes forward. So I guess the only assurance I can give you is that we are working closely with public health colleagues. We're working closely with government. We've got all the agencies joined up through the Resilience Forum, and in terms of what the city is doing, we're working as hard as we can with local partners to ensure that as the city does open up, we can do that as safely as possible. I guess the final thing to say is we are limited. All kind of public services and emergency services are limited to a degree. A lot of this will depend on how people behave, and I think we can draw a degree of comfort from how our residents have behaved during lockdown, but it will take all of us to take responsibility for that. We will do what we can to influence, but actually everyone's got to take some individual responsibility and some collective responsibility for doing what's right to ensure that we don't hit that second peak. But it's a challenge.
I mean, could I just add to that before Keith comes back in? Your question's absolutely right, Keith, and Stephen made the point about suppression rather than reducing. In a sense, it's still there, but the countries that have been most effective are those ones who instituted very quickly a track and test and isolate model. So, you know, the information that other places have got and are actually able to be more confident in opening up their societies again is the information that we're in the process of acquiring. And the suggestion is that that will not be a fully developed model until we get to the beginning of the autumn, early September. I did sit in on a meeting with the head of Louise, the head of public health, last week. And I think the view is that really you would be looking at closing a building. You know, it could be a school, it could be City Hall, it could be, you know, Aviva, assuming, you know, lots of places have got relatively few people still back, you know, in work, but working from home. And apparently there are some powers, some going back to, you know, the time when pandemics were quite common, giving local authorities or local government in general some powers to lock down. But the question about who pays is a crucial question, and one that one would ask of government.
Thank you. Councillor Driver, you've got a supplemental.
Yeah, I've got a supplementary. Can I thank the answers for that? I'm really proud of Norwich. You know, I can remember the last pandemic. I was born in '59, so the last one was in '61. So I am old enough to remember those things. What worries me is I'm proud of Norwich. We're in the top 10 destinies for shopping centres. We have millions of people come to Norwich in tourism a year. Norfolk is a big area for tourism. And what worries me is there's the southwest, which is tourism, it's attracted and people flock down there. Their our rate has actually gone up in the last few weeks because people who booked the rooms and went down there, and I believe that is part of the thing. And what worries me is Norfolk as a whole coming to Norwich. As I said, we're top 10 shop destinations. We've got a Reuters Centre here. We've got all these buildings which we may be opening up pretty soon. And I ain't heard nothing from Norwich City Council to say, yes, this is right, we should be opening up our city now, or are we against the government forcing us to do this? And should we be a bit more careful? Now, all I hear is that this is planned, and I think the plan is really good, but I'm not sure we should be doing it now. Now, I didn't know the leader wanted to say something. I mean, is he in favour of this happening at the moment, or shall we be a bit more careful?
I think I'd echo what Stephen has said, and I did which is about people taking individual responsibility for looking after themselves. I mean, it's a rather loose piece of language about staying alert, because you can pass the blame down to people for getting the virus because they haven't stayed alert and so on. So it's a kind of a moral jeopardy with that. But the last video I did, just updating people on what we were doing as a council. I think it was around the hardship fund, but there's some broader points about the government announcements about, you know, various degrees of relaxation. And there was a line in my sort of script, as it were, which said, you know, follow the government's guidance. Now, at that point, I wasn't massively happy with the government's guidance. I thought it was too quick. And so instead of using that line, because I didn't think it was a robust enough statement in the climate that we're in, with a pandemic which is still active, I said, you know, people, you really need to look after yourselves. And that's where we're at. So I'm skeptical about the unlocking, but what we are doing is we're trying to make sure that people do remain safe. And the good thing is that people in Norwich have followed that really seriously, and I think they'll continue to do that. But you know, that's our message.
It ain't the people in Norwich I'm worried about, Alan. It's the people coming into the city. And if we put out the message that Norwich is a welcome place to come now because we're actually open, are we putting out the wrong message? Now, as a Labour council, and I know Steve Potter jumps in and have a go at me about all these figures and government and scientists and everything, and even the scientists are arguing between themselves. I want to know, as a Labour council, and us as a Labour council, I know we've got Green councillors here and a Liberal, are we in favour of the government scheme to unlock this in Norwich at the moment, or are we being very sceptical, and should we be saying this to the residents of Norwich?
What we're saying, and what will be around the city, is signage advising people to be extremely careful. And that's the message. But you know what we've also been very keen on and pushing for is that track and test and isolate infrastructure to be put in place.
How much say have we got over that in Norwich?
Sorry, how much say?
How much say? I mean, our sheltered housing scheme, we've got over 1,000 elderly people in our sheltered schemes.
Yeah, and so if you think about that model, which was put in the hands of, you know, basically private contractors like and, you know, was run as a centralized system, government late in the day had worked out that they needed local government, local knowledge, local expertise, because we've got public health people who know about what you need to do if there is a pandemic or there's an outbreak of infectious disease. And, you know, we've got that expertise. And, you know, as a city, what I would be saying to people in Norwich is we will be, as we've done so far, we'll be working really hard to keep people safe, to support people, to keep people in their homes, make sure they're supplied with food and medicines and good advice about going back to work and what you should do and so on. So I think we're doing everything we can, and we are feeding up to government through the Norfolk leaders, through the Resilience Forum, you know, the issues and the challenges and the concerns to influence the way government thinks about these things. So I think we're doing as much as we can within a highly centralised system. But our message will always be, you know, look after yourselves, and we'll keep reminding you the things you can do to stay safe.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Councillor Driver. I think we've reached an appropriate point to move the debate on, I think. But before I do that, I'm going to ask a quick procedural question of Councillor Carlo. Councillor Carlo, I've just unmuted you. I note that you're possibly attempting to connect via video now. Do you want us to admit you and drop the phone?
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yes, that would be good. I'm trying via my husband's Zoom. Yes.
So we'll just see whether you're able to connect, okay? And if you
I
are,
can see some pictures of people.
Okay. Well, do you want to hang the phone up then? And
okay, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
So with that sorted out, I move on to the next speaker who'd indicated, which is Councillor Fulton McAllister.
Cool. So I've got 3 questions and potentially 2 recommendations. I'll ask the questions first and then move on. So first of all, I wanted to know whether the powers that we have, which are mentioned in 5.63 and in 5.66 and 5.74, relating to our licensing and environmental health powers, whether they do give us the ability to close down a workplace, really specifically, if an employer is infringing that. Do you want me to ask all the questions in one go or pause between each one?
Perhaps if you pause, just so they don't get lost on the way, so that'd be helpful, I think.
So through a combination of kind of environmental protection powers and also public health powers, councils do have the power to essentially kind of direct buildings to close or organisations to close. Yes.
And would that be the case if they were solely failing to implement social distancing measures?
Well, I think what's worked well. I mean, I think if there was, I mean, I don't know the criteria. I'm not a licensing expert. You know, I can look into this more fully and kind of come back to you. I think what's worked really well for us during lockdown, where there have been relatively few, but a handful of situations where we've had some concerns about businesses that have remained open, not adhering to social distancing, and the team, environmental protection officers, have gone in and had a conversation with the owner, and in most cases that has worked. So
okay.
I think that would be our approach going forward. We do have powers, as I say, to take stronger action if required, but I think our approach would be to go and send an officer down there. Quite often when someone sees a person in a uniform, then it creates a good reaction.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful to know that we've already acted upon that. The second question I have is in relation to 5.63. Obviously recognising we're no longer in control of our own highways, but obviously with the potential road closures, I was going to specifically ask if that includes the proposal for the temporary pedestrianisation of St Benedict Street.
It does, yes.
Yes.
Brilliant. And my final question is about whether there is scope with the increased move to home working. This will probably be a medium-term situation in reality, and actually there'll probably be a lot of long-term benefits that we can pick up as a council. Whether we're looking at utilising the additional space that we will have gained through lots of extra people taking use of home working when the pandemic ends, to act as an additional source of revenue in terms of either setting up a small business support hub where we could charge a minimal amount of rent for particular rooms, or get in a larger public sector partner. Presumably those are things we're looking at longer term.
We're looking at them now, actually. I mean, I think so there's a couple of things. One is, I can see a potential model for a kind of public sector partnership. So I before I moved to Norwich, I was at Kingston for a couple of years, where we had a job centre plus. There's a job centre on the ground floor of their guild hall next to the customer services, and that's a really good model, whereby essentially it's one front door, and you've got kind of access to kind of council services on one side and job centre on the other. We're looking at we are having conversations with Job Centre about whether that might be an option, and we'll also be looking at kind of other options. But yes, over the kind of medium term, clearly we need to continue to get revenue in, and looking at kind of City Hall, as we have done previously. We've had CCG in there for a few years now to kind of provide some space, and also, but that also creates a revenue stream. So yes, we are actively looking at these things.
Cool. And my two recommendations that I'd like the committee to consider. The first one is to ask Cabinet to lobby both within the LGA and government for all district councils to be given some of the powers that the HSE currently have, because they will go further than our environmental health powers do, and actually be able to allow us additional ability to enforce social distancing if employers are not doing that. In my day job, I do come across employers who are enforcing no social distancing, and the HSE have been quite blunt that they are completely under-resourced for the current situation, and I think it's something which could practically help out if councils were given those powers. Obviously, that goes without saying that there should be some additional level of funding to support that. The second proposal is actually on point 8.4, which is about the list of groups that we're consulting this response with, and just asking that we add trade unions into that document, as well as community groups, business groups.
Thank you for those recommendations. For the benefit of members, in a couple of moments, all the recommendations that we've had so far will appear on a shared screen, which I think will go out on the live stream as well. So keep the recommendations coming, but we'll be able to see them all on the screen fairly soon. I've got Councillor Oliver, who's down to speak next. Councillor Oliver indicated it was some time ago, actually, because this meeting's been quite detailed. So Councillor Oliver, if you're ready, you can speak now. Or you're mute.
Hi.
Yep. Hello.
Hi. I've got a small child next to me, slightly out of vision, so hopefully there won't be any interruptions. I had a couple of points. One is going back to homelessness, and the other one is going back to easing lockdown in the city and transport. So, shall I just ask both of them? Is that okay?
Yes, please. That's great. Thank you.
Okay. So, with regard to transport, obviously, yes, we need to encourage people using alternative forms of transport to cars. I just wondered how this is going to work, because public transport providers are all very clearly saying not to use public transport if we can help it at all. So how are we going to match those things up if people are coming, as Councillor Driver was saying, from further afield? That was my concern, how that's going to look. And the other question with regard to homelessness, following on from what was said earlier, I was wondering how long the emergency provision is funded for, how long the temporary hostel places are around for. Also, it's really good to hear that people are moving through the system and getting tenancies, but is it possible to say a little bit more about the support? Because there were tenancy support workers that were in place up until a couple of years ago. Obviously, Pathways and other organisations involved are amazing, but I'm wondering how far we can, as a council, plug the gaps that are left by lack of mental health provision, etc. Thank you.
Shall I have a go answering? I mean, I think in terms of transport, it's I guess in the immediate short term, as we've talked about, we are proposing a number of changes to the city centre to make for a better environment, to encourage people to walk and cycle once they're within the city. But actually, the point I think you're making, which is the right one, is actually how do you get people in the city? Because I cycle in on a daily basis. Once I'm kind of in the city boundary, it's great. You know, you're in a pedestrianised area cycling, but actually it's kind of 2 miles along Plumstead Road before I get into the city centre, which is the challenge. So over the longer term, I do think we do need to continue to be ambitious around our kind of transport proposals, and look at how we can build kind of cycleways and other means. Also reopening kind of park and ride schemes and that kind of thing. Press for green buses. And we have developed plans around that, but you know, let's hope that government kind of redoubles its effort in terms of making that funding available, and I think we would want to match that with our ambition. In the short term, you know, there's kind of we've got the Beryl cycle hire scheme. E-scooters is also something that I've asked the team to look at, and whether we can get an electric scooter scheme in Norwich. There are pros and cons with that, but it's potentially another option. In terms of homelessness support, sorry, Councillor, could you just quickly remind me of your question?
Hello, yes, it's just about how long the emergency provision is funded for, and yeah, sort of detail of tenancy support for people that are housed. And I did have another query actually about people that are currently in Norwich hostels that have come from other councils, and obviously, you know, we've done a great job in looking after them in the short term, but are we going to be making sure that the Council of Origin takes responsibility for them, at least financially, in the long term?
Yeah, so the last point, I mean, absolutely, you know, there is a statutory requirement for councils to continue to kind of fund people essentially in their, you know, to fund that support, and through this kind of wider work we're doing across the county, that will be that will continue to be kind of pressed. That point will continue to be pressed. It's important that we kind of all try to move at the same pace as far as possible. I think Norwich has got a really good track record of kind of moving people quickly out of emergency accommodation into more sustainable accommodation. The benefits of now kind of doing some work on a wider county basis is that we kind of try and we all move at the same pace, so that there aren't people kind of left behind in the system. The funding, I may have to get back to you about this. There's been various announcements around it. There was an initial injection of money towards the beginning of lockdown, which went to upper tier authorities, so to the county council. We have kind of submitted a request for access to that funding. Government has made a commitment that kind of funding will be there over the longer term. Now, I don't know kind of what that means for kind of Norfolk and for Norwich, but clearly we will continue to press for getting our fair share of that. And in terms of the wraparound services, as I say, I think there's a willingness and a kind of commitment for the city, county council, social care providers, public health, the wider voluntary and community sector to work together to try and tackle this problem. I think we all feel that we know, across the county and across the country, so much progress has been made that it would be a massive missed opportunity to not kind of build on that. And I will be, I'm going to be meeting with Director of Social Care in the county and looking what we can do to kind of continue to work together to try and sort these issues out over the longer term. So that commitment is there. Some funding is there, but I think that sustainable funding will need to continue over the longer term, because this will require, as I said earlier, some intensive support to really turn it around.
Thank you for that answer. We're potentially now going to have the recommendations shared on screen, and while that sort of gets underway. Great. Councillor Ryan is next to speak. So what we'll do is we'll leave the recommendations there on the screen for you to sort of have a look while Councillor Ryan makes his point or asks a question. Councillor Ryan.
We're there. Sorry about that. Something came up. It's a recommendation I'd like to propose to add to the list here. Once again, it comes back to the city centre and social distancing. Because most shops or many shops will be opening on Monday, and there is a possibility that thousands of people will be returning to the city centre to shop and go about their business. Could I recommend and suggest that the council redouble its efforts with the county council to move to some swift decisions on social distancing in the city centre? It all appears a little bit vague at the moment, and it does appear that the county council appears to be off the pace when it comes to this. So with the shops opening on Monday, can I suggest that we do redouble our efforts to get the county council to make some quick decisions on this to ensure the safety of people moving about the city centre in the weeks to come?
Great, thank you very much for that. It's a very helpful suggestion, I think. Councillor Osborne, I think you were next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question, and then I've got three suggested recommendations. My question's going to be, should I come to the question first? Have we still got time for that?
Yeah, go for the question first.
I think it should be fairly quick. A couple of people have mentioned some of the emissions in terms of sectors in the report, which is not necessarily a negative thing. I'm not criticising the report. I just wanted to ask whether there's also an assessment of the impact on aviation, on insurance industry, which is obviously big for Norwich, in terms of the assessment in section 8, I think it is, of the report. And also the effect on young people and families, I think is something that's not currently really detailed in the report, and how whether there's more, what the council's take, what the leader and the chief executive's take on that is, and whether we can include that more in detail in the report, because obviously a lot of young people not being at school not and for small children, the play parks are not open, and so what's the provision going to be for them? And then I'll come to my recommendations.
I'm happy to include kind of further references to those sectors you've spoken about in the actual report. I guess the point I would make is kind of to just reiterate what I said at the beginning. So it is an evolving document, so we can put stronger references to that in. There are some references to young people and families, and I think as we start to drill down into this and start to kind of take the work forward, we will start to get into the impacts on certain groups, whether it's kind of families or young people or single parents or whatever. The data will start becoming available, and we'll start to drill down and tailor our response. The aviation industry, I mean, yes, I mean, Norwich Airport has clearly been massively impacted by this financially. No planes, or very few planes are flying. I've had kind of regular contact with the chief executive of Norwich Airport, and we're kind of doing what we can to kind of try and support the airport through the crisis. So yes, happy to kind of, well, it'll be up for cabinet later to decide, but I'm happy to kind of receive that as a recommendation.
Yeah, that's my point of view as well. That's fine. I mean, clearly, the failure of the government's plans to get children back to school before the summer holidays has revealed a whole bunch of issues around the inequalities that exist in terms of children's learning and also on their psychological health and that of their parents. So I think one of the areas that we will explore, and we'll do this, I guess, with the county council. But there's a lot of schools which sit outside the role of the county council, and a different academy changes. What's that experience been for children and their education? I think one particular thing that we should all collectively push on is to make sure that the school meal voucher scheme continues through the summer holidays. I think it would be an absolute disgrace if the government just stopped that at the end of the school term, because well-nourished children are children who do better at school. Malnourished children are not. So I think we need to redouble our efforts through our MPs, and maybe in a joint letter from all groups to frankly demand that the government continue that scheme.
Fully agree with Councillor Waters' comments there on free school meals, and I was pleased to sign a National Education Union letter to Gavin Williamson among a number of issues related to the closure of schools, but free meals was one of those. And actually one of the things we can do as councillors is, where we find people who perhaps their financial circumstances have changed, albeit very briefly as a result of the lockdown, if they apply for free school meals now, in terms of funding for schools moving forward, that unlocks potentially up to 6 years of pupil premium funding for schools. So that's something that a positive thing that we can do that meets an immediate need for families, but also helps school funding down the line. Councillor Osborne, did you have any sort of supplementary point on that?
I've got my recommendations. Shall I come to those?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah, just on the free school meals thing as well. Also the lunch vouchers. I think Charity Sustain is taking a legal case, taking the government to court over that, which may be worth supporting as well. My recommendations. The first one would be to revise the commercialisation strategy, as raised earlier, and I think Councillor Waters did acknowledge that we're going to be going into a changed economy, and I think that we'll need to at least look at where the impact of COVID on the investments that we do have, the impact of COVID on the kinds of investments that we could be making, and look at how that property strategy could be a driver of the economy that we want to see, a green economy, especially as the government is talking about having a green industrial revolution. And I'm not sure how far I trust this government on that, but locally we could be using that source of income or that financial power to drive the green economy, as well as delivering a sustainable income for the council and to keep services going. My second recommendation would be to ask Cabinet to investigate using its purchasing powers to or potential for a reverse auction on retrofitting, and or working with partners to launch a large-scale retrofit program as a key part of the driving the economic recovery, especially as if people are going to be working from home more, and we don't want people working in cold homes. My third recommendation is actually something that came to Scrutiny it was a recommendation from Scrutiny in February, was to ask Cabinet to look at alternative sources of income to car parks, and I think that's got added urgency now, because we will see fewer people coming into the city and parking their cars here. There's opportunities to use the space that car parks currently take up and the space that cars currently take up to potentially have sites for development in the city centre. There's a whole host of economic benefits for businesses in terms of opening up to pedestrians and having more space, and now would be the time to be looking at that when there are fewer people coming into the city already. So those are my three recommendations.
Thank you very much for those, Councillor Osborne. Our officers are typing those up now, so the screen is getting quite full, so we might have to scroll around a bit later on. Councillor Sarmezi, you were next, I believe, with something to say.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
You can hear me now. Sorry, I do apologise. Yeah, I just wanted to say, first of all, to follow on from some things that I think Councillor Fulton McAllister was talking about. I'm just wondering, when we do open up, and I guess it's been covered already, but I'm still going to say it, how will we as a city council monitor, record and report on social distancing, where it's going well, where it's not going well? I think that's really important, because this is a really, I was in the city centre yesterday, didn't have to pay for parking, by the way. There was no parking fee needed in the car park. That's something that you might be interested in. But it was getting lively by lunchtime. I was there for about an hour, had to do a few things, had to go to Boots, the chemist, for example. But you could sense that things are getting livelier. Now, the shops that I visited, Boots, for example, have a very rigid and stringent, they've got somebody on the door and all the rest of it. And I went into WH Smith, actually, and they also had a very good system going on. But there were very few people in the shops when I was there. But I can imagine, and on the market, that things might be a bit different, and it might be more tricky to encourage people to social distance, not because people are being deliberately bad, but just because some of these spaces are quite confined. So I do think it's that when Councillor Driver asked the question, is he the only councillor worried about what's going to happen? I think the answer is a very firm no. I think everybody is worried, not just the councillors, but I think we're all worried about that. So I wanted to just say that. One of the groups we haven't touched on, though, and this is what I wanted to say, we've talked about vulnerable groups in terms of homelessness, quite rightly, and I'm really glad that Councillor Oliver has mentioned what's going to happen when the funding runs out for these emergency placements. But I noticed that in the report we do talk about supporting victims of domestic abuse, and there's been a great deal in the media about the increase in the number of people presenting with domestic abuse. Covered a lot on Radio 4, for example, and other media as well, and I'm sure we all know about that. What I'm interested in is just, do we have any statistics? We say in this report there's been an increase in the number of people who've presented. Do we have any statistics? And we reference in this report a wraparound service or wraparound services that will be in place for domestic abuse victims. I don't quite know what that looks like, so I think we could flesh that out a little bit. Now, I don't know if I wouldn't necessarily want to put it as a recommendation, and I know this is a live document that this very good report, very comprehensive report. We can add to it and we can develop it. But I think it's really important. We've talked a lot about how the inequalities in our society have really been surfaced. Things like education, children who are doing learning from home but don't have a computer. Families where there are lots of children in the family but they haven't got access to even one computer. I think domestic abuse is another one of those things. I think it's I know we all know about it, but I think it's really surfaced, and obviously very unusual situation, puts a lot of people under pressure. We know lots of people have been placed under unimaginable financial pressure and personal and social pressure by being in lockdown and all that's entailed. But I'd like us to think about that and what that wraparound service really will look like. And I would like, for one, to know what the statistics are on that, if that was possible at all. Thank you.
I'm happy to respond. I mean, just to give you some assurance that so underneath the resilience, so the Norfolk Resilience Forum is kind of made up of a couple of tiers. So you've got the strategic group, which I sit on, other chief executives, police commissioner, fire, the most senior people. You've got a tactical group that then looks at kind of delivery and ensuring that things are kind of actively happening. And then you've got a series of what's called delivery groups on certain themes. And there is a domestic abuse delivery group, and our head of community safety, Joe Sapsford, sits on that, and also sits on a wider DA practitioners group across the county, which is doing a number of things. One is ensuring that we are kind of continuing to liaise with domestic abuse support charities and those services to make sure that they are able to continue to operate during this period. Clearly, the way they deliver those services has had to change, and moving away from kind of face-to-face support to other forms of support. But it is a concern, but it is again, it's an active piece of work that's happening. We're also doing some work at the City Council to work with front-facing staff. So that will be staff in customer services, revenues and benefits, housing options, any kind of member of staff that is kind of actively engaging with people out there in the community, to look at how they can look at detect signs of domestic abuse, but also through their conversations and through their engagement to actively start asking some questions so that we can detect this and take action. So things are happening. As I say, this report is a summary. I mean, it was 50 pages long. If we kind of it could have been 150 pages long. But that kind of the more detailed work on many of these issues is happening, and as required, I'm happy to continue to update councillors on this and bring whatever reports requested to whatever committee on some of this detail.
Thank you for that reply. I've got a few more members who've indicated, a couple with amendments to the recommendations that you'll see on your screen. So Councillor Giles, I believe you have an amendment to recommendation 2.
Yes, so it was just to reflect what Councillor Thornton McAllister said. So between powers and that on the second line of recommendation 2, to insert and financial resources, because I think that's key. The HSE has been significantly underfunded the last decade, but so have local authority environmental health departments. So I think the government is often quite keen on giving us powers without giving us the means to pay for them. So I think the money is key. And for recommendation 3, if I may, I think community groups and business groups are already listed in 8.4. So I think Matthew's suggestion was to include trade unions in that, unless he wants to correct me.
No, that was my suggestion. I was just highlighting community groups and businesses were already included, but trade unions weren't. So thank you. I was going to ask to edit that myself.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. In which case, I now don't need to call Councillor Thornton McAllister because that's already been dealt with. So we've got Councillor Graham with a recommendation, and possibly just noticed Councillor Carlo's hand go up there, and Councillor Ryan as well.
Thank you. My recommendation relates to paragraph 5110 again about the circular economy. I'd like us to explore the experience of other councils in circular economy project, light of all that we need to do, in the light of needing to get people back into the economy, and that we have unused retail premises that we could bring back into use. We also have the opportunity with 2 new recycling centres in the pipeline to create facilities and jobs and moving stuff from being landfill rubbish to being recyclable, and from recyclable to reusable.
Okay, thank you for that. Just double check we've got enough to. Okay, we'll move on to Councillor Oliver. Please.
Hello, I wasn't indicating.
Sorry, I thought you were. Okay, we won't.
No, I was just moving my hair.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Carlo then, please.
You're on mute, Denise.
Oh.
You were unmuted. Now you've muted yourself again.
Oh, I see. Is that
There we
better?
go. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, I wonder, Emma, if you could just pull the screen up to so I can see bullet point 1, please, because I want to make some amendments there. Oh yes, that's it. So on 1A, to reduce the carbon emissions, it should be carbon emissions of Norwich and not the city council. It's the Norwich as a whole which is the issue here, please. The bullet point 2 comes from the climate change and green economy section, but the bullet point 4 comes from the business and the local economy section. So it's bullet point 4 of business and the local economy, please. Yeah, that's in relation to B. Bullet point 4 here of the business and the local economy key action. Section 4. Yeah, thank you. And then just in relation to 5, please, Emma, recommendation 5. At the end it says particularly in reference to education, if it could be added, including the local universities, please. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to go back to Councillor Graham because I gather there was missed some of your recommendations. So if we can hear yours again, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I put them in the chat box to make it easier for Lucy because I realised I was being quite long-winded. But I wanted to look at the experience of other local authorities who are pursuing a circular economy, and most immediately to take full advantage of the fact that we have 2 new recycling centres in the pipeline, and we could have facilities to upgrade the rubbish from being landfill rubbish to recyclable rubbish, and from being recyclable rubbish to being usable materials that can provide a process and employment and skills and contribute to building back better. And
okay, hopefully we've got that. Councillor Ryan, please. You were next.
Thank you, Chair. It's bullet point 8, the ones suggested by Councillor Osborne. I'd like to amend that because I'm not prepared to write off car parks in the city centre quite yet. Electric vehicles will need them. and they do play a key role in the city council's finances and the economy of the city centre. So could I amend that to bullet point 8 to looking at alternative sources of income to car parks in the city and leave it there?
Okay, thank you for that suggestion. We now come on to Councillor Osborne. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have a recommendation actually about the East Norwich partnership, but I realise that that's not actually in this particular report. It's in the cabinet paper reports. Can I raise that?
Well, there are some loose references to it in this report. I mean, it might be better if Green colleague, who's I think it's Councillor Bergerline, will be coming to cabinet, so that might be a better place to raise it at the substantive item at the cabinet meeting. I know that's not a scrutiny thing then, but in terms of the process.
Okay. Fine. Just on Councillor Ryan's amendment, I mean, this isn't committing the council to abolish car parks. It's talking about looking at alternative sources of income, and one of those alternative sources of income might be using the space that's currently taken up by car parks and looking at the economic benefits of pedestrianisation, of opening it up to people and cyclists rather than just to cars. So I don't think it's necessary to cut that out. It's only asking Cabinet to look at it.
I don't think it's...
Councillor Ryan, yes.
Yeah, it does suggest to me still, Jamie, that you want to get rid of them, unfortunately, and it's not the right time to do this. I do agree with a lot you say, and I think there probably will be a time in the years ahead when we'll have to, but we've still got to keep car parks on the radar, and it's far too early to start talking about getting rid of them and using for other uses. So I do agree with your first point. We do have to look at alternative sources of income to replace the car parks at some stage, but I can't commit myself to the last part.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fulton McAllister wishes to come in on this point.
So I completely agree with the aim of trying to ensure that we reduce our carbon emissions through limiting the use of car parks currently, but actually it would be very short-sighted for us not to continue to use car parks for longer term purposes, because with the move to electric cars, we will have a need to continue having car parks there. Otherwise, other providers will simply create spaces for cars anyway, and it's a source of income which the City Council would lose out on. But I do agree with the general point, which is becoming less reliant on our car park income, because as we've witnessed recently, it is something that's created too much of a financial hit. I think there'll always be a need for them, but we do need to bear in mind that we need to diversify our investment portfolio as well. So I agree with the point as Roger Ryan has amended it.
Could we take the contention as a vote? Because otherwise I fear we could spend another hour debating whether or not, what we should do with our car parks.
I mean, I'm happy to accept the statement that the recommendation that it should be looking at alternative sources of car parks to
Okay, that's good. Thanks, Jamie. Okay,
thank you. I think it's with all these things, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that they are, of course, just recommendations to Cabinet. So we can spend a long time arguing over the detail, but ultimately they end up at Cabinet in just a few hours' time. In this case, Councillor Oliver, I believe you have a point to make, and then I have no one else who's indicated so far.
Hi, yes, it's just about contributing to meetings. I find I just wanted to say you've done a fantastic job, Chair, and I actually personally quite like the nature of Zoom meetings for all sorts of reasons, unless I've got small children around. I just wondered how far we can incorporate chat comments into the minutes, because there's been occasions where I've really wanted to express approval for what somebody's saying in agreement. And particularly there was a point at which Councillor Driver said, am I the only councillor who feels? And I wanted to chip in and go, no, me too. But yeah, how far can we accommodate that within this context? Thank you.
Maybe it's wrong. Yeah, it's wrong.
I mean, it's an interesting point. I mean, from an official point of view, the chat doesn't form part of the meeting, but you know, certainly, yeah. I mean, there might be a scope, I guess, at future meetings to have a break and perhaps try and get agreement, or I don't know. But the chats as they happen don't form an official part of the meeting. But I think it's a valid point. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to say at this point? Or should we look at wrapping up? Councillor Osborne, you have a quick point, I believe.
Thank you. Just sorry, just coming back to the. Can we just scroll back down to the car parks thing again? Was it point 8? I just wanted to see what it was. I mean, I think that looking at, I do still think that it's worth actually looking at the value of car parks currently. It's not just about looking at alternative sources of income, but it's about looking at what the value of them is going forward and what value can be generated from them.
I worry that we're going to be in a game of tennis here at the moment. Councillor Ryan.
Don't mention tennis.
Councillor Ryan, you're muted at the moment.
Chair, sorry about that. I don't really want to put this to the vote, but if Jamie's happy to select 8, we can get on with it and wrap up the meeting and get the proposals out. But if he wants to add something to it, I think we'll have to vote on it.
Could I just make a suggestion? There could be 2 separate recommendations on car parks that go to Cabinet, or you could just go for a vote, but that would just be an alternative suggestion.
And can I just absolutely confirm that the wording on the screen at the moment is not compatible with anyone's views, so we can't let that go through. Okay, well, we'll move to a vote for what's on screen at the moment then. Those in favour of it? I'm quite sure how we're going to do the vote, actually, from a sort of public participation point of view, because whilst I, as the chair of the committee, can see everyone's faces, the members of the public can't actually see how people are voting. I'll take some sort of guidance.
Suggest you do a roll call, Councillor.
Yeah. I think we'll have to do that. Okay, so people will need to unmute themselves and say whether they're in favour or not with the recommendation as shown. Councillor Ryan?
Yeah.
Councillor Osborne?
Yes.
Councillor Giles?
Against.
Councillor Sarmezi?
Against.
Councillor Driver?
Against.
Councillor Oliver?
For.
Councillor McCartney-Gray?
Against.
Councillor Fulton-McAllister?
Against.
Councillor Graham?
Against.
Councillor Carlo?
Well, as it stands, the wording isn't clear, so I would say against. It was better before.
Fine, just put it as the wording that was before. It's fine. Don't worry. It's fine.
Yeah.
So we're currently looking at alternative sources of income to car parks in the city. Are we all happy with that?
There's 9 recommendations. We just
Yep.
voted on one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we have a consensus now without the need to have another roll call. So we've got 9 recommendations coming forward to Cabinet in just a few hours. So thank you very much for everyone's participation today. Thank you for the Chief Executive and the leader for attending, and also thank you to Hannah Simpsons, our Interim Chief Financial Officer, who hasn't had to answer any questions, but thank you for being here for the duration. And look forward to seeing everyone at the next scrutiny meeting, which is the 16th of July.
Cheers, James.
Thank you.
Chairing.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Bye.
Well chaired.
Well done.
Yeah, bye-bye.